My name is Professor Richard Cruz, and I'll be your MC this afternoon. Before we formally begin, if I may take the liberty of sharing my very short story about WASH. 21 years ago, as a student of the then MBM program, I was invited to make a presentation as a student to the Board of Governors. And my topic was a very hot topic at the time, which was how to do business in China. And in the room that I was assigned to, the governor that was assigned to me was actually Mr. SyCip. And he was sitting next to, at that time, Dean Jess Gallegos. So as I was making my presentation, Wash whispered over to Jess Gallegos and said, "Hey Jess, I think you might want to make an offer to this guy to be a professor at AIM." And that might be a very weird way of becoming a professor. But Jess eventually called me into his office several days later and extended the offer. And subsequently, after I graduated the year after, I accepted the offer. That was in 1997. So it's been 20 years. And I might be able to say that it was probably one of the best decisions I've made in my life. And as an aside, I married somebody who worked for SGV. And my father-in-law was a partner of SGV. So my family actually is a very big fan of WASH. So WASH, thank you on behalf of my father-in-law and on behalf of my wife. And on my behalf, thank you. So let's start formally. Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We are here today to remember and honor Mr. Washington SyCip, his work, and his legacy. Because of his educational advocacy, the lives he touched extend beyond those he knew personally. The entire AIM community joins Mr. SyCip's family in the mourning of his passing. To begin today's service, I would like to invite Mr. Peter D. Garucho, Jr., Chairman of the Board of Trustees, to deliver his eulogy.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone. There are so many eminent people here, so I'm not going to start the litany of saints. No. But I do want to just say a special welcome to the family of Mr. SyCip. I think George is here, for sure he will say something later. I hear Ms. Herrera is here. Well, thank you for coming over. But I was asked to speak at this memorial service because just a few weeks back, I was made chairman of the Board of Trustees. And Mr. SyCip was our chairman emeritus and chairman for many years prior to that. And he was very generous with his time, his counsel, his network, and his finances. And we will be forever grateful. For a man as Mr. SyCip, who was so distinguished and so eminent in his many years at SGV, and he served in many boards, and the community, I could see from the broadcast media and the print media, were so resounding in its applause for a life that had so much meaning and service. He served in many boards, and I had the good fortune of serving with him in the first Philippine Holdings Board and the Meralco Board. And clearly he was a man of many insights. I remember one particular board meeting where he said, out of the blue, he said, why don't the Philippine government offices move over to Clark? This was way before anybody thought about it. And I think that is what is being considered right now. Certainly the Department of Transport, which could use a little relief on the traffic. But one other area where he is also so focused was education. And AIM had a major place in his priorities. He helped establish it 50 years ago, and he saw it up close And I saw it up close because I did teach at AIM upon my return from graduate studies at Stanford, and his help was sought. And not just sought, but it was essential. As we celebrated our 10th anniversary then, I was given the grunt work of helping in the fundraising. And we certainly had to consult with Wash at the time. And here we are about to celebrate our 50th anniversary again, and here I am again. I think the most fitting and valuable tribute to Mr. SyCip would be if the Institute would be doing outstanding work and way beyond our 50 years. If Mr. SyCip were alive, and I have been having lunches with the faculty, I would report to him that so far I have been quite happy with what I have seen. I will not give a report on enrollments and finances and stuff like that. Just some impressions from a Balikbayan professor who just happens to be now the chairman. But if I were to just reflect on AIM and think about the three operative words, Asian Institute of Management, I would have to say a few things. First, the operative word of Asian. What I have seen is that we have so many new faculty from other Asian nationalities, even beyond actually. We have up north, from Korea, Japan, and we have all the way from Iran. These are people with PhDs and who now serve in the faculty. And in interesting areas, some of them quite conventional, like marketing, but also in other unconventional areas. As you know, the other operative word, and anyway, I was going to also add that we hope to be more Asian in terms of our funding. And I think that effort has certainly been kicked off already, and we hope to be more Asian in our students. As you know, the other word in our name is a dynamic word now, management. There are many practitioners here, and I would just like us to reflect on one concept. They talk a lot now about disruptive technologies, and this is disrupting many things: energy, transport, manufacturing, medicine, and even education. For this reason, the AIM management programs have to be also much more flexible, much more dynamic. And I think a quick answer to that need is that we have special courses now, which we think will also affect our regular programs. We have a course, for example, in data analytics, innovation and business, and of course, entrepreneurship. To serve these initiatives, I was happily surprised in my lunches to see that we have drawn on a lot of experts, not so conventional. We have, for example, 3 PhDs in physics who are now taking the lead in our data analytics program. And they had worked in Singapore, and now they are at the core of our data analytics program. The third operative word is, of course, institute. When I first taught here at the AIM, we were principally a case method school that helped us produce outstanding alumni. I noticed some of them are here, but of course our next speaker, Mr. Paulie Nazareno, who used to be CEO of PLDT, is an outstanding example. And while the case method is still there are the new catchphrase that I have discovered is we are talking about participative learning, wherein we still try to produce graduates who can analyze, who can decide, and who can execute. And I had served in, and I'd have to say, as I leave this topic, that I served in government, where it was nice to be in the mainstream of national decision making. I had served in the private sector with Mr. Lopez here as my chairman, and it was nice to be at the forefront of major projects like the gas project in the Philippines. But it's also nice to see, returning back to AIM, I get a special high seeing outstanding CEOs, managers who had been students of mine in the Philippines, in Korea, in India, in Thailand. All of these flow from the initiatives of Mr. SyCip some 50 years ago to help set up AIM. Of course, we are still a work in progress, but where we are is, I think, lofty enough to have made a contribution to Asian management. I just wanted to, given Richard started off with something personal, I was trying to restrain myself from saying this, but he was also concerned about AIM's continuity. And one of his instructions, so I am told, to Polly was, you better make sure that Jikyong stays with AIM. And the solution to that is find a Filipino to marry her. Polly, there are some things that I accept that have to be passed on from chairman to chairman, but that one will have to remain with you. So thank you very much, all of you, for coming here. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Garucha. Chikyang will be available during the cocktails later. I would now like to call on Mr. Napoleon L. Nazareno, former chairman of the Board of Trustees at AIM, to share his thoughts.
Mr. George SyCip, Mrs. Herrera, other distinguished guests, good afternoon. Today, we are gathered here to say goodbye to Washington SyCip, our founder and chairman emeritus, and to thank him for his lifelong dedication to the Asian Institute of Management. I am here today not only as a former trustee and chairman of the AIM board, but as an AIM alumnus, a member of the MBM class of 1973. I attribute part of my success and what I have achieved thus far in life to what I have learned in this institution. I stand before you as one example of the many success stories that Washington SyCip helped bring to fruition. Wash SyCip had a vision and mission to establish a school that would provide Asia with responsible and conscientious leaders, men and women who would not only contribute to their organization's bottom line, but equally contribute towards the social good. He had an advocacy for education, particularly towards education for the underprivileged. He understood that giving someone the opportunity to have an excellent education was one way to ensure and sustain their future and the future of those whose lives depended upon them. I have been fortunate enough to work side by side with Wash on the AIM Board of Trustees. Actually, it was Joey who convinced me to become chairman after serving for 6 years in the board. I have witnessed up close his dedication to work and his incredible staying power. He had the stamina of a man half his age and the mental agility of one who is decades younger. With Wash, age was just a number. In all matters, he was razor sharp, methodical, and precise. He would give his opinion in a simple and straightforward manner, and he would dispense advice with gentleness, humor, and grace. Wash had a passion for excellence, and his numerous achievements attest to this. I am proud to say that this drive to commit yourself to every endeavor and measure yourself against the highest standards is one that is shared by AIM alumni and reflected in the work that this institute does daily. I would like to think that if Wash could address all the AIM alumni gathered at this memorial service, he would challenge us to live up to his example and help put the Philippines on the global map of business. Such a challenge would certainly be in keeping with his desire to improve business education in the country and within the region. I also like to think that he could give us, if he could give us one last message from the great beyond, he would tell us, the AIM alumni in particular, that he is now passing the mantle. It is now our turn to serve this school in the same way he did. It is now our turn to ensure that our beloved institute gets to celebrate not just a half century, but a centennial as well. It is now up to us to assure him that we are up to the task. As we consider this responsibility, let us thank him for having done an outstanding job. Thank you, Mr. SyCip. We know you will always keep watch. Thank you.
Thank you, Polly. I would now like to invite Mr. Ramon R. Del Rosario Jr., Vice Chairman at FINMA Corporation and member of the Board of Advisors at the AIM RVR Center for Corporate Responsibility, to reflect on their long-standing association.
George, Peter, members of the Board of Trustees, I hope you will bear with me if I repeat much of the tribute I delivered at the Management Association of the Philippines meeting. I'm counting on the possibility that not too many of you were there. You know, it's very difficult to do a meaningful 5 to 10 minute tribute covering the very fruitful 96-year life of a truly outstanding person. It's even more difficult to do two that are totally different from each other. So I hope you will bear with me. I also never had the opportunity to work professionally with Mr. SyCip, so I don't have the anecdotes that Delia and Cesar Virata and people like them can offer. What I do offer today are personal glimpses of characteristics that I believe helped make Mr. SyCip the man that he was. Throughout his life, I always called him Mr. SyCip as a sign of my deep respect. Starting yesterday, I started referring to him as Wash, as a sign of my friendship, affection, and endearment. Washington SyCip was a man whose advice was sought and highly appreciated by presidents and taipans, by national and international leaders, by diplomats and politicians, by churchmen and academics, by families, whether getting along and prospering or bitterly divided and feuding. Many years ago, at the time when SGV had become the preeminent accounting and business advisory firm in Southeast Asia, Wash was described by Fortune magazine as the man anyone doing business in Asia must first see. Wash was a leading light of a breed of truly outstanding Philippine business leaders whose careers began in the aftermath of the Second World War. His close friends and contemporaries included men like Jobo Fernandez, Vert Villanueva, Charlie Palanca, P.L. Lim, and yes, Monching del Rosario. They were young men in their 20s when the war ended, and they all shared a strong faith in the future of the Philippines and the ability of Filipino managers and entrepreneurs to create and manage their own enterprises in competition with foreign-owned and managed companies. They established or acquired and developed significant enterprises like Far East Bank, Lepanto Mining, La Tondena, Atlantic Gulf and Pacific, Universal Textiles, Philsin, Taiping Carpets, Manila Peninsula Hotel, Finma, Phil Oil, Bacnot and Cement, and of course, SGV. They invested in each other's companies, sat in each other's boards as directors or advisors, and generally provided very strong support to each other. They were the closest of friends and constantly socialized and traveled together, with spouses, of course, to the Mediterranean, to Europe, even going to events like the Salzburg Music Festival. They joined similar organizations, notably the Management Association of the Philippines and the Manila JCs, through which they expanded their network. With others in Philippine business similarly imbued with patriotic enthusiasm, they propelled the Philippines until we were the second most advanced economy in Asia, next only to Japan. Even in such a high-powered group, Wash was the natural leader and was referred to by the others as Kabisi, or headman. He was respected for the depth of his insights, the keenness of his perceptions, the breadth of his knowledge, and his personal discipline. But what I believe ultimately stood out and what made Wash truly extraordinary was his generosity. And the spirit of generosity he manifested increasingly as his life and career unfolded. Besides generously sharing his wisdom and dispensing priceless advice to business associates and colleagues, Wash carried his passion and generosity to the key advocacy that he pursued, particularly after retirement: quality education for Filipinos, particularly for the poor who need it the most. But Wash's most intense and lasting involvement with education, as has already been pointed out, of course, had to do with the establishment and development of AIM, the Asian Institute of Management, which was launched nearly 50 years ago with the support of Harvard Business School, the Ford Foundation, De La Salle University, and Ateneo de Manila University. AIM quickly rose to preeminence and came to be known as the Harvard Business School of Asia. And it attracted students from all over Asia, including Japan, China, Taiwan, Korea, India, and many others. Through the years, as countries around us prospered, AIM soon found itself facing stiff competition from other Asian and Southeast Asian business schools, many of which enjoyed funding support from their home governments and business communities. Wash never ceased to strongly support AIM, as he tirelessly led and advised the AIM board as they sought to face a strong competition and restore AIM to its early preeminence. This struggle he continued to his final days. Meanwhile, after his retirement from SGV, Wash had shifted his intense passion to seeking ways to helping the poor gain access to better lives. And he believed that this would be best achieved by improving education and ensuring access to the poor who need it the most. To pursue his new focus, Wash became a generous benefactor and fully immersed himself in the work of organizations like Sinergia, whose work is focused in strengthening basic education, particularly in the poorest communities of the country, through strengthened reading and comprehension skills. CARD Philippines, which extended its work in microfinance to affordable student loans, and to Philippine Business for Education, or PBED, whose main advocacies were improving teacher quality and implementing the K-12 basic education program. Generous though his financial contributions were, even more valuable to the institutions he supported were his sharing of his time, his experience, and his wisdom. When we organized PBED some 10 years ago, we were very pleased when he accepted our invitation for him to join our board. But we were even more pleased and somewhat amazed at the level of enthusiasm and active support he gave us for the remainder of his life. Remember, he was 86 years old when he started joining PBED. In granting Wash the very prestigious Ramon Magsaysay Award some years ago, the Ramon Magsaysay Award Foundation surely must have recognized the passion, tenacity, and generosity with which Wash pursued his mission of helping the poor attain better lives. The Ramon Magsaysay Foundation called these attributes greatness of spirit, and it is this greatness of spirit of Wash SyCip that we celebrate today. In closing, I think we can all agree that we best pay tribute to Wash, not through full-page advertisements or supplements or even programs like these, but by doing our share like Wash did in helping our people attain better lives. In the case of Wash's AIM family, however, there is a specific challenge that you face. Clearly, AIM is one of Wash's most prized legacies, and its sustainability and continued success would be your finest tribute to Wash. I know that at the time of his passing, Wash was again involved in an intensive effort to forge a strong partnership that in his mind and the minds of the proponents would have contributed significantly to the strengthening and long-term viability of AIM. In its wisdom and exercising its best judgment, the AIM board chose to reject the proposal outright without further negotiation or discussion. The abrupt rejection was disappointing to Wash and the proponents, but of course they bowed to the decision of the board, which is the ultimate policy-making body at AIM. The challenge AIM faces now, with the passing of its most avid and generous donor and supporter, is to define the course that will indeed bring it long-term sustainability and the ability to compete in an increasingly challenging environment. There is no greater tribute that AIM can give Washington SyCip than to succeed in this tremendous challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Del Rosario. I would now like to invite Ambassador Delia Domingo Albert, advisor to the AIM Board of Trustees, to pay her tribute.
Thank you. As I said yesterday at the MAP, it's all right if you don't see me as long as you hear me. Vicky, George Oscar, he got a new name yesterday. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, like Ramon, I will disappoint you because this is a repeat of what I said yesterday, but I felt that it was something that I could go on saying about Mr. Washington SyCip. I will also disappoint some of you because it has been quoted in the newspapers today, but I think it's better that you hear it from me directly. Thank you, President Kang, for the privilege and honor given me to pay tribute to Washington SyCip, a founding father of the Asian Institute of Management, a business icon, a patriot, and a national conscience. This memorial is particularly important and significant because it is being held at AIM, an institution he gave so much of his long life for. Let me focus on how I knew Mr. Washington SyCip as an ambassador extraordinaire for the Philippines, and not only to one or two countries, but to the world. I would like to confirm what Ramon said of the deep friendship between Ambassador Ramon del Rosario Sr. and Mr. Washington SyCip. It was Monching. He wanted me to call him Monching. Was my boss. I was his deputy chief of mission in Bonn, Germany, when I met Mr. Washington SyCip. In the mid-80s, Ambassador Ramon de Rosario Sr. and I formed the Team Philippines in Germany. While they were cruising with their families, I was holding the fort. Their formula for economic diplomacy was to build trust between Filipino businessmen, led of course by the team of Washington SyCip and their German business partners. When President Cory Aquino made the first state visit of a Philippine leader to Europe, she was accompanied by a business delegation led by Mr. Washington SyCip, Vicente Paterno, Roberto Villanueva, the cream of the Philippine business community. Impressed by such a high-level delegation, the German government honored the country by providing the delegation with the German presidential plane escorted by 2 Luftwaffe, those were the military planes of the Germans, to enable them to get to Paris in time for their next leg of European tour. To my mind, this was the highest point ever in Philippine-German relations. It was that high regard that they gave the president's plane to this delegation. I'm delighted to see Mr. Sudhoff today because he was one of those who contributed to that fantastic visit. I think he made all the Philippine shirts for Chancellor Kohl. Mr. SyCip, ever observant, commented on the way to the plane that perhaps it was not the importance of the delegation, but my knowledge of the German language that got them the VIP German plane. That's Mr. Washington SyCip, always a nice word for everyone. In the 1990s, when I was being posted as ambassador to Australia, Mr. SyCip handed me a number of his calling cards to introduce me to his friends and business associates in that country. His calling cards contained a note of introduction, and they worked like magic, like a magic key, a master key that opened all doors. One classic card I remember well was for John Goff, who was the chairman of the board of ANZ Bank, with that famous note. Dear John, please take care of our country's little ambassador. Thank you, Mr. SyCip. However, this complemented what President Ramos said when he assigned me to Australia. And in the press conference, he said, "Today I'm assigning the smallest ambassador to the biggest island." And of course, I said, "Mr. President, Australia is also the smallest continent." On my return from Australia, Mr. SyCip, along with the business community I had assisted in previous state visits, honored me with a sumptuous Chinese dinner at the Tower Club and offered a toast, which shocked me. And he said, "To a future Secretary of Foreign Affairs." Exercising my right of reply, I responded that it would only be possible if he were the president. But alas, he could not be because of his citizenship at that time. As he predicted, indeed, I was appointed Secretary of Foreign Affairs, after a while, I shared with him the little DFA red book entitled How to Reacquire Your Philippine Citizenship. It was a guidebook which I produced in thousands, prepared to assist Filipinos who have taken on foreign citizenship for whatever reason, and for them to regain their birthright as Filipinos. Mr. SyCip followed the instructions to the letter, which finally qualified him to have a dual citizenship. Washington SyCip was a Filipino-American. In Germany, he maintained his friendship not only with the business community, but also with the political leadership. He was a frequent guest of Chancellor Angela Merkel at the annual dinner of the Christian Democratic Party's economic team. They respected his views and appreciated his candidness. Deutsche Bank even honored him on his birthday with a dinner in their much vaunted boardroom, an honor reserved only for heads of states and ministers. The day after I retired from diplomatic service, Mr. SyCip invited me to join SGV with a very clear mandate, and I quote, "to continue serving the country," end of quote. It was an invitation I felt deeply honored to accept. Seeing the need to communicate with the global business community in their global business language, in the respective languages, it was a need Mr. SyCip was keen to address. SGV produced Doing Business in the Philippines in 7 languages: Chinese, Japanese, Korean, French, Spanish, Russian, and of course, German, in addition to the original English version. The publication continues to reach out to the world, complementing Mr. SyCip's efforts in winning friends for the Philippines. At one of the awarding ceremonies of the SGV Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year award, Mr. SyCip noted a colorful linen barong, which he thought he could proudly wear in cold climate countries as well as in over air-conditioned boardrooms. He always thought of the ways he could promote the Philippines overseas. Like the unique and artistic piña silk barongs, which you're all familiar with, from Jeannie Goulburn, he ordered some linen barong shirts with Igorot weave from Baguio in the colors of the rainbow. Like the rainbow, Mr. SyCip was colorful, not only in his barong, but in his array of friends, among them Henry Kissinger, who gave a toast to him on his 90th birthday. And he said, "I would offer a toast to Washington SyCip, whom I've known for many years. He's a man who turns information to knowledge and knowledge to wisdom." Like the rainbow, he connected people. Like the rainbow, he connected the Philippines and the world, across the Pacific and across the Atlantic. Like the rainbow, he inspired hope and life after the rain. In celebrating the life of Washington SyCip last Monday, Cardinal Tagle delivered an inspiring and enduring message when he said, "Washington SyCip made us all value our worth." Thank you, Washington SyCip.
Thank you, Ambassador Albert, for your kind words. May I now introduce Ambassador Jose L. Cuisia Jr., former co-chairman of the AIM Board of Trustees.
Mr. George SyCip, Ms. Vicky SyCip Herrera, members of the Board of Trustees and Board of Governors of AIM, faculty, alumni, distinguished friends, distinguished guests, friends of Washington SyCip, good afternoon to all of you. I wish to thank AIM President Jik Jong Young for inviting me to deliver a brief eulogy on our major benefactor and founding chairman emeritus, the late Mr. Washington SyCip, an incomparable, a highly respected and much loved Filipino-American. It is my honor to do so, and I hope the words I will deliver are not just my own, but will reflect the thoughts and sentiments of all of us in this great institution. It was Mr. Washington SyCip who in 1986 personally invited me to join AM's Board of Trustees shortly after I had assumed my position as SSS Administrator and Chief Executive Officer. Hardly anyone can say no to Wash, and after all, he was giving me a rare privilege to be part of the first graduate school of business in Asia. I also welcomed it as an opportunity to expand my network of friends in the private sector. Though I did not have the distinction of being an AIM alumnus, Wash believed I could contribute my experience and financial knowledge to an educational institution that is at the forefront of developing professional managers and business executives in our country, as well as throughout Asia. However, when I was appointed Central Bank Governor by President Cory Aquino in 1990, I had to resign from the AIM Board of Trustees and Board of Governors, only to be invited back by Mr. SyCip shortly after I stepped down from my position as Central Bank Governor with the ushering in of the new Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. Upon my rejoining the AIM Board of Trustees in 1994, he immediately asked me to contact some of my Southeast Asian central banker friends who might likewise be interested to join the AIM Board of Governors. Wash's vision for AIM was crystal clear. It would be a learning institution established in the Philippines with an international pedigree and reach to fulfill its mission of being at the forefront of quality business education in the region. Wash's mandate to me resulted in two prominent central bankers agreeing to join. Dr. Lin Sian, former Deputy Governor of the Bank of Negara, Malaysia, who earned his MBA at Harvard, and Mr. Pidiathorn Devakula, former Governor of the Bank of Thailand, with an MBA from Wharton. Both of them served for many years as distinguished members of the AIM Board of Governors. Throughout his entire term as chairman of the Board of Governors as well as Board of Trustees, Wash SyCip unselfishly shared with us what he had learned in a wide variety of subjects: business, education, politics, security and defense, the economy, science, and practically whatever topics were of interest to the board. He always had insightful stories to share with us. Wash was especially fond of sharing with our foreign board members his frank and candid analysis of Philippine political developments, which sometimes made some of our local board members a bit nervous because we were concerned that administration officials would learn of Wash's critical views. Most of the time, we agreed with him, but not in all instances. One such view I disagreed with Wash was on his assertion that the Philippines was not yet ready for democracy. He happened to agree with Singapore's founder and senior statesman, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, who held that the country must first have economic freedom before enjoying political freedom. Wash believed then that we had not yet reached the level of political maturity that would sustain an effective system of democratic government. But as I reflect on all the turbulence that has and continues to beset our political landscape, perhaps Wash was right after all. In retrospect, I realize now that Wash was only thinking and feeling as a true patriot who is not concerned with personal ambitions or gains, but rather for the genuine welfare of the country and its people. Several years after I had rejoined the AIM Board of Trustees, Wash that I suggested I be elected co-chair of the Board of Trustees, in what I could only imagine was part of his succession plan in our institution. though he again had his way in that, at our insistence, he stayed on for several years more. It was only in late 2006 or early 2007 when he finally stepped down as chairman of the Board of Trustees and Board of Governors, whereupon we immediately elected him chairman emeritus so we could continue benefiting from his wise counsel. He finally got his way of getting me appointed as chairman of the Board of Trustees. It is also in the same vein of recognizing the immeasurable value and contributions that WASH SyCip has given to the AIM in terms of thought leadership, educational advocacy, personal monetary contributions, and personal efforts to raise funds for our institution that our two boards unanimously agreed to rename the School of Management to the Washington SyCip School of Business. As I said in my eulogy yesterday, I'm convinced that Mr. WASH SyCip was largest, or continues to be the largest individual donor to AIM and the most effective fundraiser for AIM. We then initiated a fundraising campaign among WASH's local and international friends for an endowment fund for faculty development and curriculum streamlining. We raised close to 85 million pesos from generous responses of so many donors, all wanting to express the same regard and admiration we had for WASH. We had targeted to raise about 100 million. Of course, we came close to it, but we did quite well. I believe that that was the largest fundraising that AM had ever had. All these were done without his knowledge. So when WASH finally found out, his reaction was to gently reprimand me for having used his name without his consent. From this anecdote, you will see the simplicity and humility of a man who enjoyed tremendous international stature and fame, yet never allowed it to get to his head, and preferred to continue regarding himself as a mere bookkeeper. There are countless other stories and experiences all of us who knew and had the privilege of being associated with Mr. Washington SyCip can share. But even a brief glimpse into his life, what it stood for, how he devoted himself to his profession, and the causes that he was passionate about, is enough for everyone to conclude that he had achieved the rarest and the most desired of all human pursuits. WASH SyCip was unquestionably a man of success as well as of significance. And because of this, he will be sorely missed. But because of this, he will never be forgotten. WASH lives on in our memories and in our hearts. And it is his spirit that will nurture AIM and its community to continue meeting its lofty standards. In closing, allow me to give tribute to WASH SyCip as a teacher's teacher, for such was his passion and love for education that he molded us in order that we can mold others. WASH may never have gotten a degree in education nor serve as an AIM professor, but he nevertheless stood tallest among all of us in this great institute. It is therefore only fitting that I share these relevant words from the late William Arthur Ward, one of America's most quoted writers of inspirational maxims, and it reads, and I quote, "The mediocre teacher tells, the good teacher explains, the superior teacher demonstrates, the great teacher inspires," unquote. Dear WASH, mentor and friend, we in the AIM community will remember you most as our great teacher. Rest in peace now and enjoy the eternal dividends of your new life with your Creator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Quisha. We would now like to welcome Ms. Sylvia Sanchez, Mr. SyCip's faithful Senior Executive Assistant, to share some of her memories and experiences of working with Mr. SyCip.
A pleasant afternoon to all of you. I could not imagine being on this stage where Mr. SyCip stood many times in the past to address the many distinguished groups that we all have today. On behalf of the staff of Mr. SyCip, Jayshi, Mang Ray, and Junjun, I would like to thank Dr. Jikyong Kang for inviting us to this very important event. This may be our first and last public appearance together because as soon as Mr. SyCip's office is cleared, we would all be up for adoption. Dr. Kang has given me a very tough task to encapsulate in a 5-minute message who Mr. SyCip is to me, his executive assistant for almost half of my life. There have been countless accolades and tributes given to Mr. SyCip for his public persona as an accountant, business leader, philanthropist, patriot, and guru from the most respected leaders of our country. Allow me to add my personal appreciation of him as a daily companion, as a boss. He has become a friend, but also at times an enemy because of some disagreements. In all these years, I have worked for him. I was by his side 6 days a week, sometimes 7, except when he was traveling or when I was seriously ill, and that was a year ago when I had a heart problem. I never really got to travel because he would always say, I need you when I am here, and I need you when I am away. So how would you feel if you were in my position? During the times when I was in this post, he would inquire when I could make it back to work the soonest. But it wasn't because he was insensitive or being a slave driver. It was mostly because he felt that his work and his life would be put on hold without my presence. That was how much he trusted and depended on me. However, my devotion to him had a price to pay, and it painfully came as I missed moments with my family, especially my children, and even my dear friends. The demands of working for him are high because the stakes are high, not just for himself, but for the hundreds of his employees, the entire company, and perhaps even the entire country. I faithfully carried on because if it was already a blessing just to know him, then how much more was it to work closely for and with him. His passion and professionalism was truly inspiring, and knowing that I was contributing to his work for nation building was more than enough to compensate for my sacrifices. It is even more endearing to know that he was well aware of my sacrifices, and he acknowledged this on occasional, simple, handwritten notes and dedications. These gestures were enough to wipe out the stress and exhaustion from a long day. Beyond his character as an authority figure in the organization, he is at his core a good man. And I am eternally grateful for I am who I am today because of him. He defined me in ways that I cannot measure and describe through his firm but gentle hand. Mr. SyCip, Thank you for being part of my daily life for many, many years. Although I feel like a lost sheep without my shepherd, I know that I can move forward as I tap on that strength I developed somehow through you. I realize now that the best way to honor you and your memory is for me and my children to live the values you so ardently espouse, to love our country, the Philippines, to never stop learning, to always strive for perfection, and to love others with passion. I will miss you, sir, but please know that your legacy will live on through me and through the countless people whose lives you have so profoundly touched. Thank you.
Would it be inappropriate to ask for another round of applause for Sylvia? Thank you for enabling WASH all of these years. May I now call on Mr. Carlitos G. Cruz, Chairman and Managing Partner at SGV and Company.
That was tough, Sylvia. I know you're the boss of Mr. SyCip. I always say that. Because a lot of people would not talk to Mr. SyCip directly, so we pass through Sylvia. We navigate that 14th floor very well. So, Vicky, Robert, and Anna, good day to all of you. Thank you, Dr. Ji Kyung Kang, for the opportunity to speak today. It has often been said that Mr. SyCip founded two schools, the Asian Institute of Management and SGV. Both the AIM and SGV are rooted in the principles of continuous learning and development. Both SGV and AIM were founded thanks to Mr. SyCip's timeless vision and dream of developing and educating the Filipino people to be the best that we can be. His focus on people, excellence, and learning permeate every aspect of our respective organizations, and both of us are indelible parts of his legacy to the country and to the world. Thanks to him, both SGV and AIM will always be purpose-led organizations, bolstered by sterling values and actively contributing to nation building. I got to know Mr. SyCip late in his life after his retirement from SGV, but I was always struck by his kindness, humility, and powerful charisma, especially to the young ladies. I have never known Mr. SyCip to raise his voice, but he always had his way. For those who worked closely with him in AIM, you definitely know what I mean. I particularly remember the story that Ambassador De Rosario shared in Mr. SyCip's biography about how Mr. SyCip single-handedly got the Ayala family to donate the land, Eugenio Lopez to donate the building facilities, and the Ford Foundation, Harvard, and other universities, and all other involved parties to work together, even being the main person to identify the Institute's first multinational board of trustees back then. Yet, he never took credit for his work to found AIM. As I said, SUV is also run like an educational institution. We focus on professional education, mentoring people, and developing in order to develop outstanding business leaders. We train our people to also become instructors so that the gift of knowledge can keep being passed down to future generations. Also similar to your multitude of AIM alumni, we have over 35,000 SUV alumni in whom Mr. SyCip's values of discipline and excellence will live on and thrive. Many generations of SUV partners and managers are also AIM graduates, which further represents the similarities in our corporate DNAs and the depth of our shared goals. Our common founder, Mr. SyCip, left us in his enduring legacy, and it now falls to us to endure that his vision and purpose will continue to live on in all the bright and gifted individuals who pass through our doors. May we all take heart and inspiration from Mr. SyCip's life and achievements, hold fast to his vision, and follow in his footsteps to make a purposeful difference in the world. Thank you and good afternoon to everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz. May I now call on AIM President and Dean, Dr. Chik-Young Kang, to share a few words about Mr. SyCip.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mr. George SyCip, Mr. Vicky Herrera, Ms. Anna, thank you very much. Also, many distinguished guests, Board of Governors, Board of Trustees, our faculty, staff, beloved alumni, many friends of Mr. SyCip, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I'm deeply honored to stand here today and pay tribute to Mr. Washington SyCip, our founder and chairman emeritus. We are within these halls because of his singular vision and foresight to develop this country and the Asian region by investing in its people through education. 2 decades after Second World War, Mr. SyCip became fully convinced that the time was ripe to establish a business school in Manila to ensure development of Asian economy and the long-term viability of the region. Mr. SyCip played a key role in initiating conversations amongst the prominent business leaders, academics, and was instrumental in gathering the resources to get the AIM project off the ground. When the Board of Trustees of AIM was constituted on the 29th of August 1968, Mr. SyCip was elected chairman of the board. That pledge he took then to serve the Institute would last his lifetime. I'm going to repeat this passage because it's a very important part of how AIM got to be born. There is a short passage in Mr. SyCip's biography that speaks to this, as narrated by another AIM supporter, Ambassador Ramon Del Rosario Sr., who said he single-handedly got the Ayala family to donate the land, Eugenio Lopez to donate the building facilities, the Ford Foundation, Harvard University, and the other components of the project to work together. It's one of his pet philanthropies. It has its ups and downs, but it continues to give a sense of mission and vision. Throughout the 49 years of AIM existence, Mr. SyCip has become our first and foremost benefactor, our staunchest supporter and tireless cheerleader. On a personal and professional level, Mr. SyCip had an intense generosity of spirit, a wellspring of kindness that manifests itself in service, in always looking to help others and help others thrive. It is a kind of quality that you find in the very best of mentors and counselors. Mr. SyCip's guidance calls to mind the old Chinese saying that teachers open doors for their students. Mr. SyCip did that for many of us gathered here today. We have become successful and continue to do well partly because Mr. SyCip opened many doors for us. We walked through those doors he held open because we were confident that with his advice and support, we would be able to achieve all that we had set out to do. The same generosity of spirit is also what made Mr. SyCip elevate the bookkeeping into an art form. Mr. SyCip liked to describe himself as only a bookkeeper, but many would say that he internalized accounting's best practices not only as a recipe for professional success, but as a means by which to live and lead life. He did so by exemplifying in thought, word, and deed what he meant to do a proper accounting of oneself and judiciously balance the books. Mr. SyCip added and multiplied for greater good. He divided the dividends fairly, subtracted losses by leveling the playing field for all stakeholders. He did this for all institutions, entities he established or was called upon to advise in some capacity. Just as a conscientious bookkeeper would do, Mr. SyCip used his considerable influence to provide a sage counsel to those who could make a positive difference in business and society. Mr. SyCip paid careful and close attention to everyone and everything. All throughout the time I have known him, I was always amazed by his incredible memory. Mr. SyCip could tell a story remembering every detail, from the most important to the smallest tidbit, even if events took place several decades ago. I used to feel completely mesmerized by the workings of his mind and how he could convey his thought so precisely and concisely. Mr. SyCip had this gift for being able to see everything all at once, each aspect in detail, and how every piece in the whole scheme of things connected and impacted the entirety. And sometimes only some, and some other times a few of the parts. I would always be awestruck at the simplicity and ease by which he did this. And I would tell myself that I wish I would learn how to do that too. How to have an artificial intelligence brain like a Mr. SyCip's. Every time he saw me, he would always be ready with a compliment, followed shortly after with a but. This was how he gave me the support that I needed, the encouragement and motivation to always do better, to never be complacent. When I just saw him last time, he said, "You're doing very well. I'll help you." As usual, I waited for that adjoining but. However, that time, there was none. And as you can imagine, I was rather puzzled by it. Perhaps he had a premonition that he was going soon, although I can't be sure. I take comfort in the fact that he said he would help. Because I'm convinced one way or another that will always be the case. Mr. SyCip will find some celestial way to still prod me, push AIM forward and upward. Being the astute visionary that he was, Wash kept his eye on the future. He was undaunted by volatility, seeing it as an opportunity for growth and improvement. When I broached him with the idea of rebranding AIM as a way of revitalizing Institute, he embraced it to my great surprise, knowing that the power to transform, to harness the forces of change for good was his way and his very reason for having established AIM in its first place. Our founder, our chairman emeritus, lived to be 96. And the legacy he has left us, our Asian Institute of Management, will turn 50 next year. There can no greater expression of our gratitude than to assure him that his lifelong pledge in ours too. Mr. SyCip, as a steward of your legacy, those of us who are part of the AIM family, our governors, our trustees, our donors, faculty, staff, and our alumni and students, we hope to serve the Institute as faithfully as you did. fully committed to your vision of providing Asia with enlightened leaders who are doing well, also do the utmost good. Thank you, Mr. SyCip, for your unselfish service and your enlightened leadership. We may be one cheerleader down, but we'll always be there, and we will always continue to carry on. Now I'd like to make a very short announcement. As I said earlier, I'm convinced that Mr. SyCip will find the celestial way of continue to help and support AIM. With this short announcement, you will understand why I believe that to be the case. I'm very pleased to announce that just 2 weeks ago, it's just a few days after Mr. SyCip passed, Mr. George T. of Metrobank generously gifted AIM with the US $2.5 million in endowment for the George T. Chair in Entrepreneurship. A few days later, I then received a lead donation of US $5 million to establish AIM's Washington SyCip Memorial Endowment Fund. From the bottom of my heart, I would like to thank our very generous benefactors, past and present and future. I would like to express my most sincere gratitude to the SyCip family for sharing Mr. SyCip with AIM. Salamat po.
Thank you, Chik Yang. I would now like to invite Mr. George SyCip for his response.
It's always tough to go before cocktail time. But we're going to be talking a little bit about cocktails anyway, I think, during this talk. So this will be a little preparation for what awaits you later on. Well, President and Dean Ji Kyung Kang, friends of AIM, and friends of my father. Thank you for honoring my father today and over the past week. And thank you for allowing me to say a few words in celebration of his memory today. My father would not have wanted this to be a sad day, but rather a day of reflection and definitely a day of celebration, especially as we are approaching this cocktail hour. You know, the cocktail hour was almost a daily and very important part of his life over the decades. It fit into his ethos, which was to work hard and play hard, but always with a purpose and always with a meaning. As many of you know, I have not been that involved with AIM as an institution over the years, other than through its many fine alumni who populate the business sector, and increasingly and thankfully, the social enterprise sector. For example, CARD has many graduates from here now. This minimal involvement with AIM is in keeping with our family tradition of each generation finding its own path and cobbling their own shoes. My grandfather, who is the founder of a bank and chairman of the bank, used to say to his kids, if you work for the bank and you get promoted to the top, even if you do well and really deserve the position, people will say it is nepotism. And if you do poorly, you will be an embarrassment to me. So it is best that you do not join the bank. My father used to repeat the story to me and my siblings, Vicky and Robert, so we were never under any illusions that we had to go into SGV. However, there is a corollary to finding your own path or running a truly meritocratic organization. And that is the belief that education is the cornerstone of success. Again, my grandfather, who was imprisoned during World War II and whose bank was seized, used to say, you can take away all of a man's possessions, but you cannot take away his education. Hence, my father used to tell me, I will pay for whatever and wherever you want to study, and I will even pay for your food and shelter while you are doing so. But above that and after that, it's up to you. And actually, as a young kid, I thought that was a pretty good deal. He allowed me to study in the US and in Spain, and then to go to the wonderland that was Stanford University during the 1970s, and then on to Harvard Business School. Expensive tuitions, all paid for by a frugal yet wisely generous dad. Now, my father was so pleased that I didn't get a car until I was about 30 years old. And he was even more pleased that he didn't have to pay for my room and board for part of the time that I was at Stanford, since I also got elected by my classmates as Dormitory Food Manager. And this position came with free room and board, plus some additional pocket money. And he didn't, for washing dishes, which I used to take flying lessons before I learned to drive a car. But I didn't tell him that until afterwards. So in any case, my father's encouragement of my brother, sister, and me to find our own ways meant that we were also not that involved with the great efforts that we nonetheless saw that he was putting into AIM over the past 5 decades. That didn't mean that we didn't share his love for education, though. As my sister, for example, remains very much involved with the International School of Manila, and I've had the privilege to serve on the board of Stanford University's Institute for International Studies for about 15 years, as well as being on the board of the San Francisco Education Fund, and now a trustee of the International Institute of Rural Reconstruction, where my father was also a trustee at one point, and that has its genesis in China's mass education movement of 1923. From time to time, though, my father would chat about AIM with me, and so it was that even on his last day on this earth, he did mention some of his hopes and aspirations for AIM, which I think you know about, and which I hope you will be able to fulfill. Now, while most of my knowledge about AIM is tangential, I'd actually like to take special note today on this hall that we are in. You know, this is the Fuller Hall, and Dr. Steve Fuller and his family were actually an important part of our family and our lives. He helped to set up AIM, as many of you know. Steve's son, Mark Fuller, who is actually now on the board of governors of AIM, was my professor at Harvard Business School. And his other son, Joe, taught me a few tricks about how to be a brilliant consultant. So Joe told me, just draw a square. And in that square, you divide that square into 4 other smaller squares. And then in one square, you put a question mark. In the other square, you put a star. Then another square, you put the cow. And the another last square, you put a dog. And that's just 4 boxes, and presto, you're a brilliant consultant. So I thought that was pretty good, you know, while I was still in school, you know. So, but anyway, Dr. Fuller and his equally brilliant wife, Frances, would accompany my parents and my wife and I on some of our trips and cruises to various parts of the world. And hence, while I don't know a lot about AIM as an institution, I learned to appreciate many of those who are associated with AIM. For today, though, I'd like to talk about just a few of the things that I learned from my father, and especially work hard and play hard, but do so purposefully and meaningfully. When I say I learned, though, I don't mean that he taught as a college professor might teach. Rather, most learning, at least for my part, came via observation or via following, because he practiced what he preached. To the point where he really didn't have to preach at all. You know, as the old saying goes, actions speak louder than words. However, what does hard work really mean? There are a couple of corollaries that I'd like to highlight, which are they're really directly relevant to AIM. Working hard also means thinking hard and studying hard, because that frames the context of your work and energizes you to work even harder. Think hard about what you really want to do and study hard the best ways to do it. Not knowing why you are working hard can get demoralizing over time, and working stupidly can get you tired in no time at all. Now, my father had a passion to get up in the morning because he knew there was a bigger purpose than just waking up and enjoying his big mug of coffee. After he retired, theoretically 20 years ago, he launched into a second career, continued to work hard, think hard, and study hard, because he saw his corporate directorships as a profession and as a calling, and wanted to render the best service possible to those who were paying him good money to sit on their boards. He definitely did not view directorships as an entitlement, nor as a place simply to enjoy good camaraderie, tell good stories, and have a good drink or two afterwards. Moreover, even for those NGOs on whose boards he served, they may not have been paying board fees, but they were willing to spend their precious time listening to his advice, and he wanted to make sure his advice was sound. Now, speaking of getting up in the morning, don't listen to those who caution against burning your candles at both ends. Your passion to work will extend the length of your candle and allow you to sleep less and more efficiently. My father didn't go to sleep early, but he was always up before dawn and didn't really need to take naps until he was in his 90s. The extra 2 to 3 hours of waking time per day adds up, and if you were to ask Mr. Ethnos Cruz over here, that adds up to at least 730 hours extra per year. Not only more billable hours, okay, if you're a professional auditor or lawyer, but also a lot more time to study and to reflect, to accomplish your heart's desires, to contribute something to society, and just to have fun. Now, seriously though, even if you sleep a lot, that doesn't absolve you of the duty to study hard, which in the business setting means keeping up to date on anything that affects your business or your clients' businesses. As a dedicated and truly professional board member, my father was always concerned about trends that might affect his companies, the companies that he served. He took corporate stewardships very seriously. For example, one of his main concerns over the past few months had to do with artificial intelligence, data analytics, and robotics. As a member of many boards, he wanted to know what questions a board member should ask. What are the challenges to the BPO sector, a bright spot of the Philippine economy, which he helped to pioneer more than 30 years ago? Will BPO services that employ over 1 million people directly in the Philippines be eclipsed by artificial intelligence? On the other hand, what are the opportunities of data analytics in, say, precision agriculture to bring a better life to the traditionally downtrodden farmers? Or in new technologies to not only deter, say, illegal fishing, but to restore coral reefs, to regenerate sea life, and boost the livelihoods of millions of poverty-stricken farmers. Having helped to train several generations of government technocrats, my father was also concerned about government economic policy issues. For example, from a macroeconomic standpoint, is the economic theory which separates the economy into primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors still relevant? The primary sector, as many of you know, is the extraction of raw materials. The secondary sector is manufacturing, and the tertiary sector is services, including financial services, schools, and restaurants. But some recognize that there is now a quaternary sector of the economy, which encompasses information technology, information generation and sharing, media, research and development, as well as knowledge-based services like consultation, education, financial planning, and yes, even blogging and designing. So how do you account for these facets of the economy, which the Philippines may be particularly good at? And how do you develop the necessary economic policies? Now, on the other side of the macroeconomic ledger, my father and I heard some intriguing analysis a few weeks ago while attending a conference in Taiwan. And the people attending were from all over the Asian area, including China. So we learned that China is starting to take into account the cost of environmental degradation on the welfare of its people. They've also estimated the cost of corruption at 1.8% of GDP. Now, how will this new accounting affect developing countries and companies in developing countries? Is it okay for countries to post a lower GDP growth rate but have higher quality growth? Should companies be integrating a double or triple bottom line into their core operations? And how should these be measured? Perhaps the answers to these questions will arise from the next generation of bookkeepers and AIM graduates. But my father thought hard and studied hard until the end, by reading and meeting with young people to try and understand the shifting social, political, and economic landscapes. It wasn't just a matter of personal interest, but because he took his job as a professional board member seriously. Now, one last story before we go on to the next one about working hard and thinking hard. Over the past few months, my father reminisced a lot over the life and death of his mentor in New York in March of this year, and the memorial service held in May, 2 months afterwards, that allowed him to reconnect for the final time, as it turns out, with some of his old friends in New York, Henry Kissinger, Hank Greenberg, Paul Volcker, and others. My father had worked in his mentor's building before World War II, which even I had not realized, and going back into that building overlooking Rockefeller Plaza brought back a flood of memories to him. He recalled hosting the first visit of his mentor to the Philippines in the 1950s and his last visit to Manila a few years ago. At that last visit, my father's mentor had asked what he should talk about to the business community. Should he talk about his bank? Should he talk about his businesses or various industrial enterprises? And no, my father said, talk about your philanthropy. And that's what David Rockefeller did. Now, since that time, their family office in the US has sponsored some cutting-edge research on social enterprises and impact investment in the global setting. Now, perhaps this is an emerging area in which AIM can contribute, if not excel in. Now, the other lesson I absorbed from my father is to party hard. But this does not mean that you party until you drop or that you drink until you pass out. On the contrary, I never saw my father drunk. I don't know, Vicky has either, but I don't think we've never seen him drunk. Nor was he prone to gluttony, although he had a weakness for rum, raisin, ice cream. Now, for my father to party hard and meaningfully, you have to think of yourself as a performer. And maybe he got it from Joanne Diaz, who's sitting over there. But my father always used to tell me, the show must go on. He actually compared himself to a performer, to a stage actor. He said, when the spotlight is on and the music is playing, one has to perform. In his case, though, the world was a stage, and he was only too ready to perform 7 days a week. He came to accept being in the limelight, not only because it was important to building his company, SGV, but because he saw it as an important part of building the Philippines and the Asian region. My father might have been only a bookkeeper in his day job, but as far as partying goes, he was a true master. As a performer, he intuitively knew that he had to grace parties and special occasions with a sense of style, thanks to his friend over there who makes all the shirts, Mr. Sidoff. Style, wit, and humor. From the early years, he encouraged up-and-coming SGV staff and their spouses to get out and socialize more. Many of you are familiar with this collection of colorful barongs, but even in the 1960s, he would tell me, he would purposely wear stylish neckties, no more than once or twice, then give it to the younger staff so that they would look good when they had to go out with clients. Now, as SGV grew, he had to keep on buying more and more ties. So at some point, finally, he raised their salaries enough so they could afford to buy their own ties. And, well, maybe the cost of ties came down. But he would still give them lessons on how to tie a proper knot in the elevator. Now, as for wit and humor, though, he was certainly cognizant that a little bit of alcohol did wonders to open the mind and encourage the spirit. But as I mentioned before, he never got inebriated. I had really admired his sense of control and the steely discipline he had in pursuing the objectives of the day, and his were long days, but still be able to get up before dawn the next day. He loved sipping his Scotch water, but make it weak, he told me. Hence, my personal challenge over the years was finding whiskeys that had an interesting flavor profile that could fit his required level of dilution. Now, in fact, if you were to look at that first photo over there during cocktail time, you'll notice that he has something in his hand that's a glass of whiskey, and it's kind of diluted, whereas PL Lim, that's not diluted. PL was a much better drinker. Yeah. Now, but while my father partied, he partied mindfully, and always with the intent of learning new things, making new friends, and or adding to his store of useful wisdom. And this goes back to thinking hard and knowing where you stand and where you want to go. That is, knowing and having a bigger purpose in life. That brings us to the third lesson I learned from my father, who in turn had learned it from my grandfather again, and that was to follow the golden rule. I do not recall going to any church or temple as a kid, but I remember being handed an index card, and it was dated 1957, which I still have. On that index card was typed the golden rule, expressed by a dozen different religions, but all boiling down to this: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I'm sure the golden rule underpinned my father's thinking and endeavors from the outset. And over the years, I realized that these were not just words on the card, but really he practiced it. In hindsight, his establishment of a meritocracy at SGV, his advocacy of education and training at all levels, his drive to perform at his best at all times and set an example for others, all of these things that he wished for himself and that he also wished for others are manifestations of the golden rule. Ultimately, though, there was something more than the golden rule that underpinned his humanity, and that allowed him to connect with so many people from so many walks of life, that gave him that joyous and boundless energy to carry on right to the very end for 96 years, and that attracted people young and old to him. My father was hardly what one would term a religious man, but he had the three things that St. Paul exhorted the Christians of Corinth to have almost 2,000 years ago. And those three things are faith, hope, and love. Now remember, in the context of the time that SGV was founded, Asians were still looked down upon. The great wars of the past century had left many Asians with a sense of inferiority, as Western and more accurately American democracy and capitalism seemingly triumphed. Yet from the very start, my father had faith in the ingenuity of Asians, and especially Filipinos, to overcome all obstacles and to stand toe-to-toe professionally against anybody in the world. My father had hope in Southeast Asia as a region and in the Philippines as a nation. And finally, my father loved not only the Philippines, but Southeast Asia. One only needs to look at the pioneering accounting network he set up with similarly idealistic partners. In Indonesia with Pak Utomo, Jose Dirjo, in Thailand with Yuktan Natalang, in Malaysia with Kasim Chan, in Singapore with Go Ki Sung, and in Taiwan with Tian Sung, and even in Vietnam later on. And speaking of love, he especially loved the Filipino people. I can attest to that because the Filipino people, he felt, were as much as his own children because they were constantly on his mind. Especially over the past decade, hardly a day went by when he wasn't trying to improve a lot of the Philippines and the Filipino people, and especially the youth of the Philippines, the hope of tomorrow. My father dedicated a large part of his life to giving the future captains of industry the best management training developed by Asians and for the Asian setting via this Asian Institute of Management. In recent decades, he also did all he humanly could to give those most in need of support, the children, what he perceived to be their great door opener, their greatest chance to escape from poverty, their greatest opportunity for advancement. And again, that was education. May his memory be for the blessing. I trust that his spirit of hard work, mindful partying, and loving compassion for others will live on in all of us. Thank you very much, and look forward to cocktails.